something that's a really big conversation in the world of luxury fashion right now is that China's luxury boom is over. And this, when I started really thinking about this and doing research into this, was first kind of informed by this video. We're not going to play it because I'm going to get copyrighted out of the wazoo. But if you want to watch it, definitely check it out. It's via Bloomberg and it's called Why China's Luxury Boom is Over. They made some really good points in the video, and doing my research, I kind of found out kind of a lot of reasons why people and luxury brands specifically are looking to different markets when it comes to acquiring new luxury consumers. So the first really big point is that 50 million people were priced out of the luxury market recently. What is the reason for this? The main reason for this is because the price hikes have been insane with luxury brands. And when you couple that with an economic downturn, especially in China, a lot of the middle class is struggling economically. There's a property market crisis. There's a high rate of youth unemployment. And so even young aspirational luxury consumers that were around during the luxury boom, it's not really the same anymore. They don't really have the disposable income that they once did. And so, that's also a thing. Yesterday, I talked about the fact that a lot of people are more looking to experiences more so than luxury goods. So that's also a reason why I think that luxury consumer habits are changing. And that's why we see a lot of luxury brands now investing in hotels, investing in experiences, making pop-up cafes, doing all these different things. So that's definitely a thing. But I think one point that needs to be mentioned, I haven't seen too many people mention, is actually the fact that the president of China, Xi Jinping, actually has talked about a few times the fact that he wants there to be more balance in wealth among citizens in China, right? And so because of that, there's actually like a governmental crackdown on, people that flaunt their wealth, which I found insane when I was doing research into it, right? This is a really good article on the screen about it. It's so insane. Like China's crackdown on wealth flaunting social media puts pressure on influencers both on the mainland and in Taiwan to echo the party line. And so that to me is the really interesting thing, because I feel like the government crackdown on flaunting wealth is almost deterring people or leading to people wanting to buy these products less, because then it gives you less to worry or think about, right? And so it's crazy. It's crazy that there's literally like a government crackdown on people that are flaunting their wealth. And yeah, like it says here, launched on April the 23rd, 2024, by the Cyberspace Administration of China, the literal meaning of which is clean and bright, aims to penalize Chinese social media influencers and internet celebrities deemed to be flaunting wealth or deliberately showcasing a luxurious life built on money to attract followers and traffic. Its reach goes beyond the behavior of social media users on the mainland, with Taiwanese influencers feeling the heat too. So yeah, I won't really read through the whole article, but I think it's very, very important to like read through if you're interested. But it's just like a very interesting point. And okay, observing the Matrix is saying it happened a bit ago. Yeah, but normally when these things happen, it takes a while for these things to actually become like really start to affect like luxury brands and have like that knock-on effect, right? From when it's launched, because it was launched in April the 23rd, 2024. So now is when they start to feel the effects of it economically. So many different factors is why, we're seeing China's luxury boom kind of coming to an end. And it's very interesting because there are big alternative markets that a lot of brands are looking to. The first thing that came to mind is this show, the Dior Fall Winter 23 show that was held in Mumbai. This is kind of an understanding that luxury brands now understand that, they need to start looking at different markets. And India is like the market that seems to be coming back a lot of times. India is the market that everyone is talking about. Everyone's like, yeah, India is the next thing. India is a place also where there are a lot of tech billionaires. There's a really big building amount of wealth in India because of a lot of people that work in tech and stuff like that. So that is the next market, and the economy is also growing quite rapidly. It's not really booming the same way that China's economy boomed, but India is seeing like economic growth. So that's why a lot of luxury brands and a lot of companies are really interested in India as a market. India is so undeserved. Like the rich people are literally begging brands to sell to them. So underserved. Sorry. Yeah. India is so underserved. I don't know why it takes all these luxury brands and companies so long to understand where these markets are. It takes them so long to understand these things. But something that I also found really interesting doing my research once again, there was a BOF podcast where Ravi was essentially explaining and unpacking the economic growth of India and basically explaining why India will not be the next China for luxury, which I found interesting because on one hand, a lot of luxury brands are seeing India as, the next big place, but then there's an argument to be made that it's not really the same. And these luxury brands need to actually do their research and really understand how the economics are in India. There's so many Indian students in fashion school in Milan. I feel like we're going to see a lot of cool stuff from India in the next few years. I think we already see cool stuff from India. I think India is so vital in the fashion world right now because India has so much expertise when it comes to fashion, especially in things of like sequin application, embroidery, those things specifically are very important. Like the Indian market is so important for that. So I think we already see really cool stuff from India, and a lot of Indian brands use their expertise in those things to make really cool stuff. So we're gonna react to the video in real time and see what they have to say about why India will not be the next China for luxury. Let's have a look, guys. Let's have a look.
Friends, so today we'll talk a little bit about the Asian macro, then about China as a benchmark, because often people ask, will India be next China? And then try to demystify India, which is almost impossible. In fact, there is a magic in India staying as a mystery, and maybe there is some good answers for the world in that mystery as such. So let me first clarify, all of us who look at the data of the last 40 years of development of Asia often ignore one major issue in all of the data. In the 80s and 90s,
well, let me see. Culture had a really good. I want to see how India will address their wealth disparity because the rise of China also meant that they significantly cut down on poverty from government policy. India is currently ruled by Hindu. Yeah, so that's one massive issue with a place like India because it's either you're living in like extreme poverty or you're like a tech billionaire or something like that. Obviously, there's a middle class everywhere, but in India, the middle class is very small compared to like a place like China or compared to, Western-based countries, right? It's very similar to even my country in Nigeria. It's either people are like super rich or living in like crazy poverty. And the president of China is very adamant on making, on reducing wealth inequality and making sure that it's more balanced. Like I even said, that's why they're cracking down on people that are flaunting their wealth. So it will be very interesting to see how they address that with the economic growth. So that's a very, very good comment made by Culture.
most of the data presented as Japan and Asia ex-Japan. In the last 20 years, it's China and Asia ex-China. And often Middle East is combined with EMEA. A lot of us do not realize that Middle East as a name was a mistake made by an American. In 1854, we all carried. It's neither in the east nor in the middle of that east. It is West Asia. And if you combine that figure, today Asia is the largest factory of the world and also largest market of the world. So just look at some of these figures for garments. 77% of the world production is in Asia. Watches, full watches or the components, 82% of them are made in Asia, and accessories, 83%. And not only Asia has become the factory of the world, when you talk about the consumption as well, Asia now is the largest market of the world, and across all these categories, more than 50%. One big question, however, is that is the factory of the world? It is also the largest market in the world. How come its share of value in these categories is so low? Only 21% in garments, 7% in watches, and 17% of value. Because that value resides in brands. And where do these brands live? The brands are today for these categories are still in Europe and US.
Someone is saying that they didn't know that India would boom. But I think it was, you would know if like, you're into tech and stuff. Because India is like really like developing fast in the tech world, for sure.
For the first category, a little bit of Japan, but otherwise Switzerland and USA for watches and fashion accessories still there. And we Asians work very hard. We open our stores from early morning to late evening, 363 days of the year. We close either for Diwali or Chinese New Year 2 days only. We take much less holidays, work much longer hours. while Europeans enjoy 45 days of holidays. I can tell you that Europe is on notice. Within a decade, this would change. This would change because we Asians are now starting to learn how to build
Someone in the chat said pharmaceuticals too. Yeah, that's very true also. That's facts.
brands as well. Now, of course, we don't still have experts like Bob Shard from Fresh Britain, but again, we're trying to adopt some of those. But it is already happening. If you have not noticed, some of the categories, like airlines, the top 3 airlines in the world are Singapore Airlines, Emirates, and Qatar, all 3 Asian. Top hotels in the world, look at Mandarin Oriental, Six Senses, Rosewood, Aman, all born in Asia. And we are creating a new brand called Jaya now, which will be a combination of Aman with culture of Soho House. All this innovation is coming from Asia. So if it has happened in those 2 great categories, it will happen in this as well. So Europe has to watch out. Now, talking about the story about India and China, India-China story basically started because of a very serendipitous moment that happened exactly 46 years ago on this very day, 13th November of 1978. Deng Xiaoping was invited by France as a state guest, and China didn't even have a plane that could go directly to Paris. It had to refuel. On the way to France, it refueled in Bangladesh. On the way back, it refueled in Singapore. And he met Lee Kuan Yew. On that day of 13 November, he asked Lee Kuan Yew, how did you guys develop this country into such an incredibly developed place? And he told him we did only one thing. We opened up the country to the world. We invited the world to come and trade here. You guys in Beijing are much more intelligent, big mandarins and titans. If you open up, you could win the world too. He literally, from that 30 November meeting, took a holiday in Lijiang.
I see people in the chat, you guys are making good points. Like someone is saying that, the way that China was able to build infrastructure quickly versus, the likes of India shows why like India won't have as big of a boom as China. I think that's a very fair point, to be honest, because China has extremely advanced infrastructure. But part of when a country booms, it just depends on the government. Because if the Indian government uses some of the money gained from this economic growth to build the infrastructure, to then allow more commerce to be available because they've built the infrastructure and improved it, then over time, that would definitely improve things. And then our thoughts on, how far India can go economically will be a lot more positive in terms of like it being the next China, or so to speak. But it's hard to see because I feel like India is very much like Nigeria. And I have like my best friends are actually Indian. So we talk about like Nigeria, India all the time, right? And Indian government is so corrupt, like the Nigerian government. So it's kind of like, do they want to build the infrastructure? Do they care to build the infrastructure? Or do they just care about, like buying expensive cars and like living lavish? So that's the thing. That's the problem. Do they care about building the infrastructure as much as the Chinese government do? Or do they just care about lining their own pockets? So that's the problem.
Wrote this famous paper and presented next month in the 11th plenary session of the Congress, National Congress. And that paper was called Reform and Opening Up. And that influence of Lee Kuan Yew led to China opening up in 1979. 1980 was actually the first year a first private enterprise license was given in China to a woman who was making buttons called Chang Huamei.
Someone just said all governments are corrupt. There's levels to corruption. Beverly Burke, I don't know where you're from, but I feel like unless you're from somewhere like India or Nigeria, I feel like people don't have a concept of how bad corruption can go. Because like in the UK, for example, corruption is it's diet corruption compared to somewhere like Nigeria, right? Because in the UK, I remember during COVID, Boris Johnson gave the contract to his friend to do like trace and track and stuff like that. And it was like a multi-million-dollar contract. So of course his friend benefited from that, and it is corrupt because you didn't give the contract to the best candidate. You just gave it to your friend, and then your friend had to figure it out. And that's why it was really badly done, right? That being said, the UK government is still mandated in a sense that you have to still spend a lot of the money on like government things. So like if there's a budget for the roads, you would literally go to prison if you stole the money that's meant to be used to pave the roads. Or if there's money that you're supposed to give to schools, like there's a budget for schools in the UK, all that money actually goes to the schools. So yes, in the UK, they might be corrupt in the sense they give their friends contracts, they give themselves contracts. but they have to actually still put a lot of the money, the government money, into what they say they will. Now, Nigeria, the level of corruption in Nigeria, and India is kind of the same. So, like, the level of corruption in Nigeria is the kind of place where, like, a governor will just be like, yeah, I'm taking everyone's pensions and there's nothing you can do about it. I remember when I lived in Nigeria, the government, some governor would decide, yeah, I'm taking the whole education budget. So when they take the whole education budget, literally, there's no money for the schools. So then teachers stop coming to teach students in schools because they aren't getting paid because now there's no education budget anymore. The governor stole it. So then schools just stop running. And then kids go to school and they're like no teachers. And they just go to school. And that's like the level of corruption. I've never in my whole life living in the UK ever seen a situation where someone in the government, like an MP, steals the money that's meant for a school, and it means that there's no money available to pay the teachers in the school, which means that teachers don't turn up to the school. I've never, ever seen that in my life in a Western country. So when we say corruption, I know people say, yeah, there's corruption everywhere, but like there's levels to corruption. In places like, you know, certain Asian countries or certain African countries, I feel like a lot of people don't have a grasp of how bad corruption can get because you're far removed from it, because you haven't lived in a country where corruption is that bad. But trust me, there are levels to corruption. It's like in Nigeria, they will literally just take the whole education budget and be like, or like I've seen cases where they would take like the budget for hospitals and people are literally dying in the hospitals because they don't have the money to buy the equipment that they need to keep the hospital running. It's like insane.
And then started the whole enterprise. And look at in 80s and 90s, 20 years, it goes on to become a factory of the world. First started in the Pearl River Delta, those 3 states, and eventually across all of China. Now, of course, these 2 nations have almost same population. India is now across China and growing faster. But when it comes to luxury market, talk of any brand, be it Mercedes-Benz or BMW, or talk of Louis Vuitton or Cartier or Patek or whatever, India is less than 1%. China is about 40%. How did this happen? Could this happen in India going forward as well? That's the big question. But if you look at China, in 1990, China was where India is today, about 1% of the market. It's exactly similar. There were about 5 malls in China, and the rest of the brand had to go to 5-star hotels to open stores. That's how first big Vuitton store was in China World Hotel. India is exactly about that. In the 10 years, it didn't develop much. In 2000, China's economy was still smaller than New York City's economy. New York City economy was 2.7 trillion, China was still 2.3 trillion. The real takeoff happened in 2002 when China joined WTO. And as the Americans call, things went off the charts, be it in consumption or exports, all of that. And by 2010, it was clear China was the next big thing. And then came the largest economic expansion ever in the history of this planet in that decade of 10 to 20, and 10% become 33%. You know, if you go to World Bank...
Someone is asking, isn't Nigeria a rich country? I think Nigeria is a good case study when we're talking about like India's growth, which is why I'm okay to talk about it, because a country can be rich, but it doesn't matter. Because Nigeria is technically a rich country in the sense that like Nigeria produces more like petroleum than regions in the UAE. And if you think of how much UAE countries like, well, the UAE and like Middle Eastern countries have developed since they discovered oil to where they are now is absolutely insane. But that's because they have people in power. There's a moral conversation about how they behave morally, which is questionable. But in terms of like caring about the country and developing the country, they obviously care. When I traveled to Qatar, if you're Qatari, first of all, it's really hard to become like a native Qatari or to get any form of like Qatari passport or anything like that. And they've done it that way so that if you're Qatari, you essentially own everything in the country. So they make it where tourists want to come there, tourists invest there, but then tourists can't really have any ownership there. And it's only people from there that have all the ownership. Whereas somewhere like Nigeria, we produce more oil than the UAE. So technically we should be richer, but we're not, because we just have people at the top in the government that literally steal all the money and don't care to invest it in like the country in any way. We have gold, people steal it. We have every natural resource you can think of in the world. We have cement in abundance. We have sand in abundance. We have everything. Like limestone. It's just people control it. Like people in big places control it. And so in Nigeria, that's why the class disparity is insane. That's why you have like a really huge, like most people in Nigeria are living in poverty basically. And then you have like a really small subsector of like ultra rich people that steal all the money and work in politics. And these are the people building mansions, buying houses in London, buying Ferraris all over the place. They have a house in Saint Tropez. So, that's the problem. And then also we sell ourselves short because the people in government only care about themselves. They don't care about the country. So a good example, China is slowly buying up parts of Nigeria because the government is signing all these deals with the Chinese government. And the Chinese government are smart. So they know fully well that over time, because our government doesn't care about the country, they're just going to like fumble the deals. And stipulated in these contracts is like, well, if you can't afford to pay for these things over time, then we'll just own that piece of land. So obviously in 10, 20 years, China's just going to own parts of Nigeria. It's the same thing with our petroleum. So can you imagine, this might turn into a rant, but it's kind of what happens with these countries, right? And I'm passionate about my country, so it is what it is. But can you imagine that in Nigeria, right, we, for the most part, don't refine our own petroleum? There are multinational companies that refine our petroleum and sell it back to us. So I don't know, I need to do research on how much this is still the case. But when I was living in Nigeria, we would mine our own petroleum, sell it to the USA and buy it back for more money. Like, in what world does that make any sense? But the reason why that happens, by the way, is because people high up in the government are bribed to do that. So they are personally incentivized to sell out the country in a way by giving the US a good deal and selling them unrefined petroleum and buying back refined petroleum for more. So we own the natural resource and we make a loss on our own natural resource. It makes no fucking sense. And there's a billionaire in Nigeria who morally, once again, there's issues with him morally, but his name is Dangote. He's the richest man in Nigeria. He wanted to build refineries so we can actually start, refining our own petroleum. And there was so much like governmental blocking. He wasn't actually almost like not allowed to build refineries, and he's still fighting it. And do you guys know why he's struggling to build refineries so that we can actually refine our own natural resource? Do you know why? Because Shell is a really big player in Nigeria, and they are one of the countries that owns or like runs a lot of the refineries in Nigeria, and they run a lot of just regions in Nigeria, right? So Shell is lobbying the government to block Dangote building these refineries, because obviously if we start refining our own natural resources, then so many countries are going to miss out, and so many countries would suffer because of it, right? So this is the level of corruption. Like, so when people say, yeah, every country is corrupt, there's like levels to like I feel like a lot of you, if you're based in the West and you live in the West and you're not from any other country, some of you would find it so hard to even fathom the level of corruption that exists in like different places. So bringing this back to India, this is why it's very hard to see how they could have like the same boom as China, because of the corruption that exists there.
Bank in Washington, D.C., they have the motto to get the world rid of poverty. Entire World Bank effort across the world from 1950 brought only 380 million people out of poverty. China alone, credit to them, took out more than double of that out of poverty in that period. It's the largest economic expansion ever in the history of the planet. And that leads to this. So it's almost always linked to the basic economy. Yes, number of people, same. But if you look at people who earn more than $12 a day, who you can call broadly as consumers, the number in China is exactly similar to the number of people who are not consumers, who are poor and vulnerable, earning less than $12 a day. So that's the thing. The starting point is very, very similar to their 1990. Now, if you look at this other data, per capita income, 2,700 to 13,000, about 4.8x, let's say 5x. If you look at upper middle class looks big. When it comes to upper middle class, it's only 30 to 35 million, which is like a Germany middle class, whereas China is 120 to 150. That's another about 4 to 4.2x. So if you take 5x and 4x, that's your 20x multiple right there. But where is the other 2x multiple? The other 2x multiple lies in the fact that, like Japan or Korea, China also adopted a lot of Western culture. The men would wear suits with tie, like in Japan or Korea, whereas in India, it's still very, very Indian. And that's one of the major things about India. India, across the segment, be it for men or women, is very Indian and will remain so for a long period of time. And there is a lesson in that. This is another aspect. We were just talking earlier about China starting to get old, and India is still a very young country. But there are two lessons here. China's demographic dividend, which I define as the year when number of people working became more than number of people dependent. In China, that started in 1998. 98 was the first year after 250 years, there were more people working than dependent in China. Unfortunately, that lasted only till 2018 because of single child policy.
Someone in the chat said it's only a matter of time before it becomes westernized. That is kind of true, because normally when there's an economic boom in like a country, then a lot of like Western based companies come and they kind of change the culture. They start building Starbucks and like different things in the country, and then slowly it becomes westernized. It's not necessarily a good thing, because you kind of want different countries to maintain their culture and also be unique. But that's kind of just what happens from, like, if you just look every other country.
Policy. Once again, the number of dependent are more than number of people working. So they lost that. India, in fact, the demographic dividend, exactly of the same figure, started in 2018, same year when China ends that, is likely to stay for 41 years. Now, India, therefore, has great raw material of youth that is now getting into workforce, and provided India can really employ them well. That is India's challenge. India is today, has very large number of people unemployed or partially employed.
Exactly what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the wealth divide, where he just mentioned that loads of Indians are unemployed or partially employed, and that's like a big issue that needs to be addressed.
On the other hand, the other lesson here is China getting old, not necessarily bad, as you saw in the previous presentation. The older generation having less money to spend on kids, having less money to spend on new homes for new kids, could spend much more on themselves. Not only that, China's real problem today is not consumption. China's bigger problem today is the property market. Ever since China became, from 1980 onwards, the home ownership it didn't exist in the country. 73% of the household investment, 73% went into property in the last 40 years. This is the highest in the history of the humankind anywhere in the world. And that market overbuilt, and today you have an issue that 33% of the economy, which is the property market, is moribund. 7 of the top 10 property makers are likely to go bankrupt, and Chinese government has decided not to bail them out, but let the pain be absorbed by the economy. So yes, it will be 2 or 3 years, or probably 4 years of pain that China will have to go through. The second issue is China is facing geopolitical challenges across the West, particularly Trump's election clearly signifies that there'll be bigger challenges for China. So therefore, anybody who's involved in export-led economy is likely to face headwinds going forward. But
just wanted to show you guys something quickly, just to add context to the thing I was talking about in terms of Nigerian refineries, because I think these things are really important, because how an economy grows depends on things like the government and how these things work, right? And so you can use Nigeria as a case study for what's going to happen in India. But this is exactly what I was talking about, with the refineries and Shell kind of being involved in, them being blocked. So Dangote, who I was talking about, made a 750 million offer for the local refineries and to kind of take them over and kind of run them properly. And Obasanjo, who was a former president, blocked it because apparently we have an inability to, and even the crazy thing is, right, he said that the NNPC, which is like the National Petroleum Company, is unable to effectively manage the national refineries. And he still rejected the offer from Dangote, which is absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. It's so insane. And here he's talking about how, Shell also rejected his offer, which is insane. I think people don't realize how much, like someone said it earlier in the chat, right? I think Shell is genuinely a criminal organization. Like the amount of death that they've caused in places like Nigeria and other countries, and the amount of government power they have, and the fact that they can, lobby the government to block certain deals that's in the best interest of, a country, but obviously they don't care. They just care, and they demolish the environment. They've had so many oil spills in Nigeria, destroyed our environment. That company is honestly one of the worst companies to ever exist in the entire world. But I think it's why I just wanted to show you guys this and add this context is just so you can see the corruption, the levels of corruption. Like, look at this quote here. I asked Shell to run the refineries for us, and Shell said they wouldn't. I asked them to take equity, but they said no. Later on, I called the boss of Shell to come and tell me what the problem was, and he gave me 4 or 5 reasons. He said, first of all, they make a major profit from upstream, not from downstream. He said they run downstream just to keep their head above water. 2, he said our refineries were too small. 60,000 barrels, 100,000 barrels, and I think 120,000 barrels. He said that at the time, the average refinery was going for 250,000 barrels. So there you have it. There you have it, guys. But let's continue watching the BOF video.
Yet China is growing. How is China growing? By the China was smaller than New York economy in 2000, but now it's $18.3 trillion economy and is growing at a slow rate, 4%, but still that is higher than rest of Asia's growth overall. So what is growing in China still is a consumption. People are richer, people are consuming better. Yes, it has stalled for the time being and it's less consumption in luxury because you need good mood, which doesn't exist today. I think 2-3 years from now, China will go through this cycle and come back better. So do not count the dragon out. Dragon will remain important, and therefore in all your strategies, do not start taking that out. India, now all of you saw a few months ago the big Ambani wedding. That Ambani wedding did a big service to India, but also a disservice. Big service, I put India on the map, put Indian luxury on a show. Yeah, from Kim Kardashian to Mark Zuckerberg, all adorned in Indian attire, showing up there was great. The disservice was the aspect that they live in a 2 billion home, 4 people living in 400,000 square feet of space, right next to the most densely populated, largest slum in the world. I hope Mr. Ambani will take on the mantle of another gentleman who lived in the same city in 3-bedroom apartment, Mr. Ratan Tata. He managed the equally large empire, and he gave away in his lifetime $102 billion to charity, more than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett together. I really hope he takes on that mantle going forward. India needs that service. Another aspect, now beside India being different, within India, India is very different. And here I'm just describing 4 major arenas of India, but within each of those it's also very different. So north of India is all about pomp and show, living for the day, overspend. Because India was attacked 64 times, of which 38 times the conqueror was successful in capturing some part of India or entire India as such. So these people are always facing wars. Who knows about tomorrow? Live for the day today. So the south, on the other hand, was very protected. And people in the south live very different life, but they live very, very subtle luxury. Western people are perhaps the most connected to the Western world. So today, if you are in Mumbai saying that I bought this particular bag in Palladium Mall or in the Taj Hotel, it's really losing the magic. You want to say that I was in Harrods with so-and-so, or I was in Rue Saint-Honoré and I bought it there. That's what they want to do. So East, on the other hand.
So how could they change that? That's a very interesting point, kind of talking about the nuance of the different kinds of people in India and how kind of like the customer profile, right? That's really interesting, saying that it's not special to say that you bought the bag in an Indian mall, so you want to be able to say that, you bought it in Harrods. How can they change that? Because if they want that luxury boom in India, you want it to be socially acceptable and also special to buy it within the country. It's kind of, in China, what made it, a big market is because people were buying loads of luxury goods in China. Like, people weren't going to the UK and buying all the luxury goods. Otherwise, it would show up on the report as the UK being the biggest market, right? So how do they fix that? Because it's more of like, this is kind of more of a cultural, social, societal thing. How can you shift that?
And is the true intellectual capital of the country. Almost all major philosophers, all major scientists, mathematicians, musicians came from there. Those guys do not want to indulge in so-called luxury. If you want to sell a piano or to send a violin, you go to Calcutta. These guys are intellectual to a fault, so much so that they elected a communist party to govern them for 7 times in a row in a multi-party system that was the continuously longest-serving communist government in the world. Intellectual to a fault, but true genius capital of the country even today. The other issue in India is, as in many economies, Africa and Asia, the parallel economy is very large.
Oh, I didn't know he's about to hit them with the corruption conversation. Okay. I didn't even know because I haven't seen this yet, but this should be interesting.
A very large part of that parallel economy goes into one asset class, that is land or buying apartments. Because India has severe rules to send money abroad, but for a few thousand people, they don't have Swiss accounts or Singapore accounts, and they typically put that corrupt money into land. As a result, land is very expensive.
So people are making interesting points. You can't, when you say luxury, most people think of Italy, UK, France, China, and Japan. Yeah, but it wasn't always the case. You know, Japan as a market is not that old. Like, Japan only really started to become like, even though Japan was the first big luxury market outside of the typical places, and then other places followed suit. But like, it's not that old. Like, Japan in the 80s was not seen as like a really big luxury market. This stuff is quite recent. It's quite recent. It's not like France or Italy, for example, or the UK, which are more historic when it comes to the luxury fashion market. So I feel like because a lot of these, like China, especially China being a luxury market, is quite recent also. So in a 20-year span, they could change mindsets on making India seem that way also. So it's just like, how would they go about doing it? But I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's impossible at all, to be honest. Neo says it's like having storefronts that are evidently extravagant and somewhat a spectacle in comparison to their existing malls and stores. I guess that could be a huge thing. That could be a huge thing. Swear the 80s was huge for luxury influences in Japan. Yeah, I mean, the 80s was huge for luxury, like, in general in Japan. Like, that was just it. I think with the UK's PR crumbling a little bit, India have their chance. Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure, Japan in the 80s were going wild with crazy spendings before they were met with Plaza Agreement and bubble burst. Yeah, facts.
Well, land is so expensive that to build a mall and make it profitable is very, very difficult. As a result, there are only 5 malls. Unless, like in China, if government subsidizes or give free land to build malls, it's likely to remain the biggest constraint. The other issue, some of you who have dealt with India realize India also has the big issue of incredibly complex customs, very high duties, and also very, very difficult process. India's got its act put together to really open up on infrastructure and also open up its regime. The other question is not only for general fashion, but is India ready for luxury? You know, once Bernard Arnault told me that you cracked China, but being Indian, how come you didn't ever crack your own market? And I told him that LVMH is not luxury enough for India. And he said, yeah, right. And I said, no, Mr. Arnault, I'm actually serious. And then he goes, why do you say so? I said, there was a time when India is a great market.
Shots fired. He's like, LVMH is not luxury enough for India. Let's see what he said. I'm sure he's going to sugarcoat it slightly. But in my mind, I kind of know what he was alluding to.
For luxury. There was a time when Louis Vuitton sold almost quarter of his sale to India. Cartier sold about 1/3 of his sale to India. But if you go to Cartier headquarters, there's Maharaja of Patiala's picture on the screen with a tutti frutti necklace. It was Indianized jewelry. Maharaja of Kapurthala was the largest collector of Louis Vuitton trunks. Almost every trunk was made for some particular Indian practice. And that Indianization was very, very important piece of that. Even from UK, Rolls-Royce sold the largest number. First air-conditioned car, first Phantom were all delivered to India. And those were all Indianized in their look. When Birmingham was the biggest center for luxury, a lot of people would not believe that England was ever a center of. It was. And there was a company, a Baccarat equivalent of the time called Osler, for making crystal chandeliers. And all Nawab of Hyderabad and Udaipur, they will send something made in wood to Birmingham from India so they could copy the same design in crystal and sand. So that has always been a big element. Indian luxury will always remain very Indian unless you Indianize, unlikely to crack that market. And you saw in Ambani wedding that aspect.
So that's a good point he made, that you have to make products that are specific to the Indian market. What he said is Indianize these products to make them sell in the Indian market. But I don't think that should be a problem for a lot of luxury brands because they already do that with China. Like, there are so many Chinese exclusive garments when there's a Chinese New Year. These are Chinese exclusive things that you can only buy in China and it's specific to that market. There's so many Japan exclusives. So many brands do like Japan exclusive things. It's specifically tailored to that market. Even not just luxury, Nike. I'm so jealous of Nike Japan because Nike Japan always has these really unique colorways and unique designs, but it's because the market in Japan appreciates that, and the markets in the UK or different parts of Europe and the US don't really, at least according to them, what the research that Nike has done, they feel like consumers outside of Japan wouldn't appreciate it, which is why they don't produce it. But Nike Japan gets everything. They get everything. So I don't think, specializing products for a certain market is anything new. I think they could do that quite easily, to be honest. But it's good that he's pointing it out because maybe a lot of people didn't realize it. Like a lot of these luxury business people don't realize it because some of them are not, really privy to these sort of things. They're quite out of touch with everything.
So across the spectrum, be it youth, and you see that not just in Bollywood, every aspect of Indian life. And that is why if Kim Kardashian wore a Western dress, would have looked like a sore thumb. Same for Mark Zuckerberg. So that is India for you. The other aspect of India, I would say, as McKinsey report clearly said, that India, given it has got large youth population, now they're getting into workforce a large way, and they're becoming a big consumer. But bulk of that is value for money consumer. So if you are a value for money player, you certainly, be a Zara or Nike or H&M, that's a big market for you. Of course, the constraint of mall still remains. If that can get cracked, that's a big play. The other part is Western luxury, particularly accessories, can still do. So we might make a great costume, but don't make good shoes. So you then buy Baluti to go with Indian. And the same thing is true for women with their bags and all. But when it comes to jewelry or garments, it's very, very difficult for Western brand unless they invent. Hermes made a sari collection. Dior made a sari collection. It was sold within a week. And I wonder why they didn't do another collection after that, because that was more done for the launch.
You see what I mean about a lot of these people that make business decisions at these luxury brands don't have a clue. You have to wonder how these people get jobs. How can you launch a sari collection, like a luxury brand launches a sari collection in India, it sells out immediately, and then you never produce one again? And these are the same brands that are talking about complaining about luxury slowdowns. And they talk about all these like really complicated business models that they have. Like, yeah, we're doing this and we're doing that to try and improve. And when they talk to the shareholders, and it's like, or you could just do what you've seen that already works, which is like do a sari collection in India and like involve a lot of Indian artisans on that. Literally, they got direct positive feedback and threw it away. That is the literal definition of like not knowing what you're doing.
But not followed up on that one. They cleared the lesson. Customized to Indian way of life. So it's not only basically the look. India, you take Dior, maybe there are 5,000 Indians who can fit into that. Ergonomics, our bodies are very different. There is only one company that has done the study very well, which is Marks & Spencer. Marks & Spencer has M&S standards. They're the only ones who study the ergonomics of bodies across Asia, not just India. So those who are into manufacturing try to adopt those standards. They have the best information. And finally, manufacturing locally. There are brands like US Polo Association at, again, value for money level, or a better value like La Martina, which is a phenomenal brand for Argentina. They are now making it in India, and India is now the fastest growing market for them. So many of these elements you have to keep in your strategy to do that. And again, other aspect of value for money is often, like in China, by the way, 1990 onwards, for Dior, beauty was the first segment to enter with, where you could indulge in luxury at a very low price point. And that's how India could also be started in those segments first: beauty, accessories, and onwards. So overall, India has got its act together to put going forward.
What is Kai asking me? This might be controversial. Do you think these Western brands believe that the Indian market cheapens their image in the West? Not saying to me, by the way, but to that. Yeah, I know what question you're asking. You're not saying that that's what you think. I don't think so, because I think that these luxury brands, there's nothing that they could do where people would see their image as cheaper, because they already sell to the highest bidder. They sell everything possible. They've cannibalized every single brand that they run, especially the big conglomerates. Everything that the brand stood for, they've kind of destroyed that. The quality is down, so the price is up. So at this point, I don't think any market that they could go into could potentially cheapen the brand, to be honest. I don't really think that. I think if they cared about how their brand, if these brands actually cared about how their brands is viewed or how it's branded or who wears it, they have to make sure the right people wear it. They wouldn't have the business model that they have, to be honest.
Forward, but brands also have got their whole agenda in front of them, what to do. One, to Indianize. Second, to customize. Both are essential, otherwise not likely to win in India. Second part, if, for example, if you are Omega watches, you will sell more Constellation.
So let's see. Dior Louis Vuitton's previous Sari collections were seen as superficial attempts at cultural appropriation, lacking genuine engagement. But then was it seen that way because then it sold out? So like I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect between like what people that can afford this stuff buys and then what the outrage is in social media. Because why I'm saying this, by the way, is because I feel like there's different perspectives you can have. So for example, when Dior had that recent collection in India that was inspired very much on Indian silhouettes and stuff like that, I spoke to my best friends, because once again, my best friends are Indian, and I was like, what do you guys think about this? Like, do you like it? Do you not? And they both had different opinions, in the sense that one of them said that, you know, it's cultural appropriation and things along those lines. And then my other friend said, actually, she appreciates it because she feels like Indians aren't seen, or she feels like there's no visibility for Indians in the luxury space. So in a way, she kind of appreciates that they are taking the Indian market more seriously, and that's kind of part of the proof of it. So I think it almost depends on the perspective you have. But the buyers definitely came from a perspective of like, they're just happy that, you know, the luxury brands are catering specifically to their market, which is why it sold out. So I can imagine. So I think sometimes there's a disconnect. And this is also true also. The outrage was mostly on Western social media. The Indian customers bought it up. So that's also another thing where sometimes a lot of people in the West have outrage on behalf of people, like on behalf of Indian people, when actually a lot of people that are there on ground are just buying it. And they're like, yeah, finally, we have something that's, you know, catered towards us and our market. So I think it really depends. Yeah, I understand, but then it proves the point when they did not follow up and produce it. No, but then it's up to them to kind of do the study on the people that are buying it. What do they think? And clearly they didn't really care because it sold out. So they have to do their research and like figure that out. But I mean, that's their job. I'm not going to do the research for them.
Which you can see from a distance to north, but you sell DeVille to the guy in south. If you're Patek Philippe, you sell Nautilus to the guy in north, and you'll sell simple strap watches in the south. And again, I mentioned, if you're Stanway and Sons, you would go nowhere but go to Calcutta. So in this, adaptation is very, very important as well, part of India. And India, again, as you said earlier, stupendous growth. It's right in front of us, but bulk of that growth is led by very young population, yet with a very low per capita income, and therefore bulk of the play is an aspirational. So if you are in aspirational play, go to India today, this will be your biggest play going forward. In luxury, you still have to work. So Slumdog could become very much a millionaire, and all of you could have a great play in it. But there is one last thing I will leave with. India has to make sure, particularly Mr. Modi has to make sure, they do not make the geopolitical darling into a pariah if they make the democracy into illiberal democracy. As Tina Brown yesterday said, India is going in the wrong direction on that front. You may lose that status. The second message to all of us, why...
Someone said Chanel's CFO is Indian. I don't know who the chief financial officer is, but the CEO is definitely Indian. The CEO of Chanel is definitely Indian. I don't know about CFO though. Also, Leah says, yeah, I think there is somewhat of an issue if you are primarily benefiting outside of the country. Doing that in the country is less offensive. Yeah, fact. So it's a very different situation. And that's why these brands just need to figure out how they do it and how they navigate it. I think, let me be very honest, let me be very frank. I think a reason why a lot of these brands get accused of cultural appropriation and they don't know how to navigate it is because a lot of people that are the heads of these brands are like really rich European, mostly French people or Italian. And those are some of the most out of touch people you'll ever meet in your entire lives. So they don't even have like the social awareness to know how to do things in a culturally sensitive way where they won't be accused. Like if you go into a country, you work with local artisans, you pay the local artisans, they work on a project, you create kind of jobs, you create the garments for the local market, and then you make sure that you sell it in that market first. And then whatever's left, then you can sell it in a market elsewhere. If that's how you do it, there'll be little to no, oh, this is cultural appropriation and all that sort of stuff, because it's literally Indian clothing made by Indians for Indians, just with the budget and the company of or being sold by a Western brand, but there's a way to do it where it's not going to be seen as, culturally insensitive. But a lot of these people struggle because, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of these people that work in fashion. They don't even know anything about any other country to start with. So they couldn't even begin to understand like cultural differences and stuff like that. That is too complicated of a conversation to have with these kinds of people. That's why they always struggle to do things like this. Yeah, of course, if you're doing like an Indian marketed collection in India, of course most of the models need to be Indian. It doesn't make sense for it to be any other way because that's literally who you're marketing to. So once again, I just think they just don't have the range sometimes to really understand how to navigate these things. So yeah, that's the issue.
While we are trying to make India adapt the West, I think there is a message for the West to adopt from India. Two most famous Indians ever have still very relevant lesson for us today. Buddha, who said, all your unhappiness comes from your desires. Less desires, more happiness. And second, Gandhi. He gave up his Savile wardrobe and Northampton shoes. When he died, he had one attaché case with 3 dhotis made with self-spun cotton dhotis, 2 pair of shoes, 1 pair of eyeglasses. But he still made it to Time magazine's cover as Man of the Century. So we can adopt a little bit more of Gandhian, simple living, high thinking. Thank you.
That was a really good speech. That was really insightful. I really, really enjoyed that. Someone's mentioning Lena Nair. Yeah, that's the CEO of Chanel. She was at a pharmaceutical company before she went to Chanel. I think it was Unilever, but let me see. Let me test my CEO knowledge. Lena Nair. Yeah, she was the former chief human resources officer of Unilever. But yeah, now she's the global CEO of Chanel. Yeah. So yeah, CEO of Chanel's Indian. Wait, someone harassed me on a plane once about enabling culturally appropriating because I made a blog post about Mexican style embroidery and folk style on the runway. This was quite a while ago. She was crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy. Would you consider Maison Margiela, Mato Maison Margiela, Tabby shoes, cultural appropriation? To be fair, I don't know. I don't really know, but I don't think so. I don't really know, but I don't think so. I wouldn't say so. I mean, if someone can recognize that they do not have an idea, that sounds like a perfect time to invite someone who is from that given and specific cultural background, mark it onto your team. Yeah, but you need to understand once again, like because all you people here watching the live stream, you guys are actually intelligent people. And I don't know how many of you watching the live, maybe some of you are really, really rich, but I just think that as a byproduct of growing up in an extremely rich environment, you're very sheltered, and that sheltering prevents you from mixing with a lot of people, and it also prevents you therefore from gaining like social understanding of things, which is why like sometimes I go to business meetings with certain fashion people that are high up in like the business world, and they say things and you're just looking at them like, this is the person that makes decisions on like where the directions of the collections go. So when like cultural appropriation happens, I'm like, yeah, I'm not surprised because these people don't get it. They just don't get it. So it's like, it's very hard for that kind of person to even understand that it makes sense if you don't understand a certain market culturally to actually maybe hire an Indian consultant to learn about the Indian market. Sometimes it doesn't even occur to them because they're that like out of touch with just the world that it doesn't actually occur to them that that is a good decision to make, which is why they have people like me. That's why I have a job. So that's the problem. You're smart, so you're like, it's normal. Why wouldn't you just hire someone from the country to understand the market? But it doesn't occur to them. Those kind of ideas don't come to their mind. To just make a collab with a designer from that country is like so easy. Yeah, but you guys are saying things that these people don't think about. I'm telling you. Honestly, it's just how it goes. It's only appropriation when the people appropriating has oppressed the culture they are borrowing from, but not to make this about cultural appropriation. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I love Kartik research, by the way. I'm a big fan of Kartik research. I'm a big fan. Even hiring a person from that market doesn't work. Hiring an Indian without understanding the caste system and regional differences has its own issues. This is also true, but like, this is why even if they were to hire someone from there, they would do it because when these luxury brands eventually hire like someone to help them understand the market, they always do it in the most like generic big company way that doesn't allow for any nuance. Because like, okay, someone like me, for example, I know all about the Indian caste system and how it affects like how society is in India, and kind of like the discrimination that happens because of the caste system and how that affects the economics and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, but I understand that. And I'm not even Indian, by the way. But I only understand this because, I mean, I grew up in London. There's loads of Indians in London. My best friends are Indian. I mix with a lot of people. Going back to these people don't mix. They don't talk to a lot of people from many different cultures because they're just sheltered. They went to a school. Like, a lot of these people grew up in schools where everyone was a rich Italian or everyone was rich and French. So just by virtue of their upbringing, it doesn't allow them to have a very, detailed viewpoint on like the world or understanding things across the world or understanding cultural nuance. So even when they do hire the Indian consultant, it might just be someone from a certain perspective of Indian culture and society, and they wouldn't have the understanding of the nuance to take that information but then also inform it with what you know and find where the balance is. They can't do that. You're asking a lot from these people. You're asking a lot. Yeah, sheltered and, dare I say, hateful. Exactly. Hiring is one thing because that is more important for internal company culture, but at least market research or hiring people in positions of decision making locally is what creates a difference. Yeah, true. Maybe the sheltering is deliberate. I mean, partially it's deliberate, but I think part of it is you're just kind of a byproduct of your environment. Like, if you are a billionaire, then you just want to send your son to what you deem as the best school. And maybe the best school where you are is some like 50,000 euro a year private boarding school in France. But then who else is in this private boarding school in France? In France, other French elite people. So then when you grow up in a place like that, what tends to happen is you grow up with viewpoints that French elite people have with French elite people, and then you don't learn about any other cultures or anything. And those people leave the school with that mentality, and then they are fast-tracked into really high business positions because their dad owns the company. Like, your dad is Bernard Arnault, your dad is, so you're fast tracked. So that's why these are the kind of people that just will not get any other culture. They just won't get it. They just see everything business wise is just they're looking at numbers on a screen. So that's why culturally they always struggle when it's like different markets, and they make decisions that are really questionable. But it's not really their fault in a way. They're just a byproduct of their environment, if that makes sense. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Yeah, true. True, very true. Because I think people neglect to understand that most researchers in other countries are Western based and essentially have the market sway with these companies, so the researcher bias becomes evident. Yep, that's very, very true. There is a lot of research bias that happens in these spaces, to be fair. But to be honest, that's why it's more easy for them to westernize the collections bit by bit. Yeah, to an extent.